Okay, look, I will admit that I do enjoy guitar products across the great divide between analog and digital, but I am kind of a tube amp guy. So I can't help but notice that most of the cool new guitar gear that comes out is digital. Things like this TONEX Cab here, FRFR cab designed for your favorite modeler. So I got to wondering, are there ways that tube amps can enjoy the conveniences offered by digital? Like, for example, taking a tube amp and plugging it into an FRFR cabinet. So I decided to try it. Doom-de-doom-de-doom. Oh! All right, while there are considerations, which I will discuss in this video, it actually worked pretty good. Can something like this breathe new life into tube amps? Why don't you join me? Hey there, I'm Dan, the self-proclaimed Lonely Rocker. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, there's a saying in the tech world that if you want to create a product, you need to identify a problem and then come up with a product that will solve that problem. So somewhere along the line, someone decided that amps were too expensive,
too heavy, too loud.
And there's a whole generation of guitar players who now believe that to be the case. Now, the truth is, I don't believe you're a guitar player unless you've at least tried a tube amp.
But I get it.
Modern day conveniences, it's
too hard to go backwards.
But there are some really great products offered for digital modelers, like this TONEX Cab here, FRFR Cab. You can host Cab IRs, you can plug your TONEX Cab into it, and it's a very cool gig-ready setup. But what about taking a tube amp and putting it into an FRFR cabinet? Now, there are considerations, which I will talk about, but I've got two setups that I want to share with you today. I've got this Wangs VT15. This is a lunchbox style JCM 800 kind of amplifier, and the Revv G20, which has a built-in torpedo captor load box. Yes, spoiler alert, load box. But let's start off by checking out a couple of tones. The Revv G20, playing some riffs on this awesome Balaguer Espada Limited, always with my Stringjoy strings, not sponsored. I just love both of those brands and wanted to mention that, but that's going into the TONEX Cab. Let's check it out. So I have to tell you, that felt pretty good. Now, there's a bit of a disconnect in what I hear here and what you're hearing on your end. And the problem here is that capturing an FRFR cabinet, while many have tried, it's kind of difficult because this cabinet here, which can host Cab IRs, and a Cab IR consists of a speaker, a cabinet, a microphone placement, and things like that, all coming up with the ultimate sound of that IR. So if I do a close miking setup here with a 57 or a 906 or something like that, it's going to color what you hear. So I'm using this setup here, which I've actually used a couple of times. These are the Sennheiser MKH8020s and an MK4, a condenser microphone, which is capturing the low end through the bass port that's on the front. Listening back to what I recorded, I tried a number of different ways. I use a little bit of room correction, and it definitely is better. It's being here in the room ultimately is the best way to judge. And I have to tell you, it sounds really good. It sounds big. It sounds really natural. And what's really cool about it is that an FRFR cabinet like this, because you can load different Cab IRs, you can sample different speaker cabinets. I've got a few loaded on here, and I'll do a couple of comparisons in a second. I'm using lunchbox amps just because in terms of size, they are more convenient.
And I know some of you modeler people are a little sensitive to anything that weighs more than a sub sandwich, but
that being said, they are more portable and connected to a FRFR cabinet. It's a pretty compact
system.
A little bit easier than a big 100-watt head and a 4x12 cabinet. But what's really interesting is that this cabinet is actually really loud. Being a powered cabinet, I think it's something like 750 watts or something like that. But taking an amp that's 15 watts, 20 watts, going into this cabinet, it is loud. So you want to play with a drummer, you want to play live. I'm going to talk about the logistics of that. But this is a bit different because the Wangs VT15 is a more traditional style amplifier. Beyond the traditional components inside here, tubes and the whole thing, there's no additional circuitry, there's no load box in here. But using an external load box, I've got the Suhr reactive load here. I've got a few different loads here, but I chose this one because it's extremely basic. It's not that expensive, it's high quality, And all I'm doing is taking the output from this into the load box and then into the cabinet. I'll get more into that in a second, but let's take a listen to a couple of tones with the Wangs VT15. And this time I'm using my ESP LTD Phoenix 1000. Let's check it out. For some reason, those tones actually translated a little bit better. Not necessarily here in the room. I'm not talking about how they sound to me because they both sounded great to me, but the tones from the VT15 and the TONEX Cab together, just the recorded tone sounded a lot closer to what I'm hearing here in the room. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it sounded really, really good. I was pushing this amp pretty hard. If you notice, I'm not using any pedals. The only thing I've added, by the way, is a little bit of reverb in the mix just because we need our reverb. But it sounds really good here in an amp like this, which is pretty basic, edge of breakup kind of thing, into this cabinet sounded really, really good. Now, I want to talk about this cabinet for a second because the TONEX Cab, which I've actually done a full demo of this cab, so I'll put that above my head here somewhere down in the description if you want to check it out. But it's quite a versatile FRFR cabinet. As I mentioned, you could load Cab IRs onto it, so you can actually load 8 different presets. It has built-in EQ, and it's got this dial in here called amp tone. And what that does, it lets you dial more of a close miking sound to something more kind of a live in the room kind of flavor. So sitting here in the room, I found that if noon is sort of the 50% point, at around 10 or 11 o'clock, it brought a little bit of room ambience into the sound. But when I recorded it, it made the tone sound even more distant. Because as you notice, I'm not close miking here. It didn't work. So this is the solution that I came up with. But in the room, it's a great feature to have because it creates a bit more of a room ambience, not reverb per se, but just sort of a sense of space. Now, when I recorded both of these amplifiers, I had it all the way set to the mic position. That's sort of the more close miking sound. And it was the best solution I had for the recorded tone, at least the best way I can translate it to you. So it's really something that you can't do obviously on a standard guitar cabinet. Now I'm going to get into the setups now because I want to show you how this all fits together. And then from there, I want to talk about some of the potential benefits for you tube amp guys, or maybe you're already in this world and you've been thinking about getting a tube amp. I think there's a lot of reasons to consider here. Can you think of any right now? I'd love for you to play along. If you've got any thoughts about the setup so far, just let me know in the comment section. So let's dive into the setups between these two configurations. So if you're starting from scratch, you've got a few things to buy, but if you already have an FRFR cabinet, an amp like the G20 is a great place to go. There's a number of amps on the market that have a built-in load box, and in the case with the G20 and actually other Revv products, they actually have a 2-notes torpedo capture built inside. That gives you a load box, plus you have a cab loader in there. Now, 2-notes has a proprietary dyne IRs, but you can also load in standard cab IRs. That lets you put them right on board here. Now, what's really important is to distinguish between the line output from the load box and the actual speaker output, because you do not want to take a regular speaker output from a tube amp and try and plug that into an FRFR cabinet. You likely will do damage to your amp, so please don't go there. But identify the line output. And what I've done here on the G20 is, because it has a built-in cab loader, they have this rotary dial here where you can load up to 6 different dyne IRs or cab IRs. So what I've done is I've got 5 here, but position 6, I've actually disengaged the cab IR. So this is just that raw amp tone. And then I take that line out and I plug it directly into the line input on the TONEX Cab, and I load all my cab IRs on the TONEX Cab itself. Now you can do the reverse. You can choose your cabinets here if you'd like and have a preset on the TONEX Cab that has no cab IR. I just found utilizing the cab IR loader on the TONEX Cab gives me all those features that I already talked about, the EQ and balancing and things like that. But you can work either way. It creates a lot of flexibility between the two. Now, there are some amplifiers that will have a built-in load box with no speaker sim. So in that case, you get the raw amp tone. Same thing, you take the line out, not the speaker out, and plug that directly into the TONEX Cab or whatever FRFR cab that you have. And in this case, I load the cab IRs right on board here. It's a simple system and it works great. Now, the second setup will apply to any and every tube amp on the market. I'm using a little lunchbox here just for demonstration purposes, but you can use any amplifier on the market because you're taking the speaker out from the amplifier, but it has to go through a load box. Again, I will remind you, do not take a speaker out from a tube amp and try and plug it into an FRFR cabinet. If you could even figure that out, you have to go through a load box. So what I've done with this particular setup, I have this Suhr reactive load. This is a great load box. It's not expensive. It's high quality. There's virtually no features on it. It's just a DI level, and that's all I need for a setup like this. So you take the speaker output, and you do have to note the impedance. Amps sometimes have single outputs or they have multiple options. In this case, I take the 8 ohm output. This is an 8 ohm load box. Some load boxes are switchable and some are fixed. In this case, this one is fixed. So make sure you're matching that just like you would a regular speaker. And then there's a line out here. You can take an XLR or a 1/4 inch regular cables, and that will plug directly into the TONEX Cab. Of course, we have no cabinet simulation in this case because we're getting that raw amp tone through the load box. But as I mentioned, we can load our Cab IRs right here on the TONEX Cab, and you're good to go. It's a really simple setup. All you need in between is the load box. That's what makes this all work. Again, do not try to plug a tube amp directly into an FRFR cab because I take no responsibility. All right, so now I want to just give you an example of some of the flexibilities of using an FRFR cabinet with a tube amp like this, bringing that additional feature set that you would normally have with a tube amp into a regular cabinet. Is I'm going to just show you the same riff, same amplifier, but I'm going to switch the cabinets just to give you an idea of the wide range of tones you can get from one amplifier. So why would we want to do this? Now, I've always appreciated that as a guitar player, I have lots of choices. I can mix and match. I can use a head from one brand, a cabinet from another brand. I can mix and match different pedals. You know, modelers have come along and they've given you everything in one box, and I can't deny the convenience. I have an assortment of modelers here, and I find them great for recording. I like to use them as signal routing devices, and I've talked about that ad nauseum here on the channel. But as a guitar player, I love choices and I love mix and matching different components to come up with something that's more uniquely mine. And that's one thing I think is a lost art with modelers. And while you can say, well, I can create all these presets, I've got a palette of, or a choice of 300 different amplifiers and pedals, and I can come up with something that's really unique. But really, we're just pushing a bunch of ones and zeros together and mixing them up and coming up with their sound. And every single user has access to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It all depends on what you want. But I love creating things. I love trying to be unique and coming up with things that are more my own. And I think this is really a hybrid, because I love tube amps. And unless you've played a tube amp, it's hard to have that conversation if you haven't experienced it. But it's just, I don't know, why do we need to emulate something that's really good? And there's a big difference to me in playing a real tube amp versus playing a modeler. So the interesting thing about this concept is sort of, it's right in the middle between those of you who are in the modeling camp and the real amp world. It's kind of right in the middle. I mean, if you're deep into modeling, you've got an FRFR cabinet already, you've been wondering what it's like to have a real tube amp. Well, you could get a little tube amp and integrate it into your system. If you're a tube amp guy and you're just such a purist, it's like never ever gonna try digital stuff. Well, if you've already got a load box and all you need is the FRFR cabinet, TONEX Cab, pretty great. I don't know, this is right in the middle there. I think both of you guys, either side, might want to consider this, because this was a lot of fun. So again, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. If you want to support this channel, if you appreciate what I'm doing here, things like the TONEX Cab, and that I do have affiliate links in the description. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does support my efforts here, and I appreciate that. But if you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And while down there, I did mention the TONEX Cab. I have a whole video on that that's here on screen if you want to check it out. And remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. And now I'm thinking what other little formulas I can concoct, mixing up digital and analog. We'll see what I can do. But perhaps I'll catch you in another video.